Have you ever felt lost in your own mind? Like no matter how hard you try, thoughts keep spinning and spinning, stories about who you are, what you've done, what people think of you, what might happen next. But what if all of that isn't you? What if the person you think you are is just a story your mind is telling? And deeper than that story, there is something more peaceful, more free, waiting to be discovered. In this talk, we will explore one of the Buddha's most profound teachings, the illusion of self. It may just change the way you see yourself and the world forever. So take a breath. Let's begin. Who are you? It seems like a simple question. Most people would answer with a name, a profession, a role they play. I'm Sarah. I'm a father. I'm a writer. I'm a student. And yet, if we take a quiet moment and ask again, not to others, but inwardly, who are you? Really, we may feel a kind of pause, a hesitation. Something doesn't quite fit. That hesitation is the gateway to a profound truth the Buddha saw over 2.500 years ago. A truth that many of us still struggle to see clearly today. That the self we so fiercely protect, constantly reinforce, and continuously chase is not as solid or permanent as it seems. That what we often call I or me is, in fact, a moving process, not a fixed thing. This idea can feel unsettling at first, but it is not meant to strip away our value. In Buddhism, the teaching of no self, or anatta, is a path to freedom, not denial. It is not about erasing who you are, but seeing clearly what you are not. Let us begin gently. Imagine sitting by a river. The water flows past, never the same from one moment to the next. You dip your hand into it, and though it seems familiar, what you touch is always new. Your thoughts, emotions, sensations, and even your sense of I are like that river, constantly changing, endlessly flowing. And yet, we often treat the self as if it's a rock, fixed, unchanging, a thing to defend or improve or promote. Buddhism invites us to turn inward, not to escape the world, but to look more closely at the story we've built about ourselves. We are conditioned to identify with our bodies, our roles, our memories, but are those truly you? The body ages and changes. Roles shift. Memories fade. If what you are can disappear, was it ever truly you? This does not mean you don't exist. You're here. You breathe. You feel. You think. But the question is not whether there is experience, it is whether there is a separate, unchanging self behind it all, controlling it. Buddhism suggests, look and see. Don't take it on faith. Simply observe. In the West, we are taught to build an identity, to stand out, to define ourselves clearly. There is nothing wrong with this culturally. It helps us organize society. But spiritually, it can become a cage. When we cling too tightly to the idea of a fixed me, we suffer, because life, by nature, is fluid, and we are that fluidity, not the frame that tries to contain it. Let's explore a simple exercise. Close your eyes, if you're able, and observe a thought as it arises. Maybe it's about something you need to do. Maybe it's a memory, a worry. Just watch it, without trying to change it. Now ask yourself, who is thinking this thought? At first, it seems obvious. Well, I am. But when you try to find that I, not the label, not the name, but the experiencer itself, where is it? Is it in your head? Your chest? Is it the voice in your mind? Or the awareness behind that voice? This is not a trick. It's an invitation to look deeply. When you look for the self, you don't find a thing, you find a process. You find thoughts arising, feelings flowing, sensations appearing and disappearing, but you don't find a solid I behind it all. That's what the Buddha saw. In the Anatta Sutta, often called the Discourse on the Not-Self characteristic, the Buddha said to his first disciples, Form is not self. Feeling is not self. Perception is not self. Mental formations are not self. Consciousness is not self. When one sees this clearly with wisdom, one becomes disenchanted, and through disenchantment, one becomes liberated. Let's break that down in today's terms. The Buddha is referring to the 5 aggregates, called khandhas, that make up what we experience as a person: body, feelings, perceptions, mental habits, and consciousness. These are not abstract ideas. They are what we live every moment. And the Buddha is saying, look at each one. None of them can be held onto. None are permanent. None are you. You may say, but I feel them. I think them. They are mine. But again, we must look closer. When a feeling arises, joy, sadness, anger, did you choose it? Can you control it completely? Can you hold it? Stop it from passing? The truth is, these elements come and go. We are the witness, not the owner. This realization is not nihilistic. It's liberating. Why? Because when you stop trying to defend a self that doesn't truly exist, you begin to relax. You stop clinging. You stop fearing death, criticism, failure. You begin to live more lightly, more honestly. You become more compassionate because you realize others, too, are caught in the illusion of me and mine. We might ask, but what about our uniqueness? Our story? Isn't that important? Of course it is. Buddhism doesn't deny that we have personalities, memories, preferences. It doesn't say we should become blank slates. What it teaches is that these things are not fixed, not permanent, not the ultimate truth of who we are. Think of a rainbow. It appears when conditions are just right: sunlight, water droplets, angle of view. It's beautiful, vibrant, seemingly real. But try to grasp it, and there's nothing there. Your personality, your history, your emotions, they're like that rainbow. Real, but not graspable. Present, but not solid. And what happens when we stop trying to grasp? We suffer less. We let go of the endless striving to be someone, to prove something, to win the race of identity. We can still love, work, create, and engage with life fully. But now we do it from a place of peace, not panic. We participate in the dance of life, knowing it's a dance, not a battlefield. This shift in view is the heart of Buddhist practice. It's not about blind belief. It's about seeing clearly. The Buddha famously said, "Don't believe what I say. See for yourself." And that seeing begins here, with the question, who am I really? So as we move into the next parts of this series, I invite you to keep that question alive, not to rush toward an answer, but to rest in the openness it creates, to observe your thoughts, feelings, and reactions with gentle curiosity, to begin to notice where you cling, where you fear, where you contract, and to ask, is this truly me? Or is it just a passing wave? When we begin to loosen the grip of the self, even slightly, the world begins to feel more spacious, more compassionate, less heavy. And that, dear friend, is the beginning of awakening. Let us begin this section with a quiet reflection. What is it that you most often refer to when you say the word, I? Is it your body, your thoughts, your name, your emotions? These are questions we rarely ask ourselves. And yet they form the very foundation of our suffering and our potential for liberation. The Buddha encouraged us not to take anything for granted, especially the things we assume to be most obvious. And perhaps nothing is more assumed than the self. When we look deeply, we see that the self we cling to is built from pieces. One by one, we assemble a kind of identity puzzle. This is my name. This is my face. These are my memories. This is my pain. This is my desire. All of these parts come together and form a shape that we then protect and promote as me. But just as a house made of wood, nails, and cement is not house in itself until we give it form, so too the self is a construction, a temporary one. Buddhism points us toward this truth not to confuse or scare us, but to free us from the burden of always maintaining and defending that construction. Start with the body. We often think, this is my body, but which part is truly you? Your hands? Your skin? Your beating heart? And yet each of these parts can change, age, be replaced. The cells of your body are constantly dying and being renewed. In fact, every 7 to 10 years, nearly every cell in your body has been replaced. Are you the same person you were 10 years ago? If so, how can that be, when the body itself has changed? Now move to the mind. Are you your thoughts? They arise and pass like clouds across the sky. One moment you're confident, the next you're insecure. One moment you're joyful, the next you're anxious. If you are your thoughts, why can't you control them? Why do they change so rapidly and often contradict themselves? If you're not the body and not the thoughts, perhaps you are your emotions? But emotions too come and go. Love one moment, anger the next. A child laughs in joy and then cries in sorrow. All within minutes. We grow up, but that pattern remains. If you were your emotions, wouldn't that mean your identity is always in flux? So where, exactly, is the permanent self? This is the question the Buddha invites us to sit with. Not to answer in words, but to observe in silence. When we do, we begin to see what the Buddha saw, that what we call self is a collection of changing processes. And the suffering comes when we try to freeze those processes into something solid. Let's take this further into daily life. Think of a time when someone insulted you. Maybe they said something that felt like a personal attack. It stung. You replayed their words in your head. Maybe you even lost sleep over it. Now pause. What exactly was hurt in that moment? Was it your body? No, it may have reacted, but it wasn't physically harmed. Was it your thoughts? Not directly, although thoughts were triggered afterward. What was hurt was the idea of you, the image you carry of who you are, the reputation you hold, the identity you've carefully built over the years. When someone speaks against that image, we feel threatened, but the question remains, is that image really you? Buddhism teaches that suffering arises when we cling to things, to people, to experiences, and most of all, to this false image of self. The insult hurt not because of the words themselves, but because we believed in the solidness of that self they targeted. When that belief loosens, so too does the sting. This teaching is radical, not in a destructive sense, but in the sense of going to the root. It doesn't ask us to become passive or to erase our personalities. Instead, it asks us to see through the illusion of permanence. It invites us to notice that what we call me is constantly shifting. And this, far from being depressing, is actually liberating. When the self is not so solid, it doesn't need to be defended all the time. You don't need to be right all the time. You don't need to win every argument. You don't need to constantly compare or improve or prove. Think about the freedom in that. What if you could simply show up as you are, not the carefully curated version of you, but the present moment experience of being, without a name attached? This is not theory. This is a practice. Each time we pause and observe what's happening within us, we get a glimpse. Each time we let go of the need to label or define, we step closer to freedom. The great Buddhist teacher Ajahn Chah once said, "You are not your thoughts. You are not your feelings. You are simply the knowing. That knowing, the silent witness, is always here. But it gets covered by noise, by the constant story of me, mine, and I." When we step back, when we stop feeding that story, the space opens, and in that space, peace is possible. Now let us reflect on the 5 aggregates again, the components of the so-called self. The body, form, feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, perceptions, mental formations, habits, impulses, and consciousness. These 5 are not Buddhist dogma. They are the building blocks of our experience. And when we look into them clearly, we begin to see that none of them are stable, lasting, or truly controllable. Take feelings. For example, we often say, "I am sad," or "I am angry." But what if we changed that to, "There is sadness," or "There is anger"? Do you feel the difference? In the first case, we become the emotion. In the second, we observe it. This small shift creates a powerful space between you and what is arising. It allows you to respond, rather than react. This is not detachment in the cold sense. It is compassion, because when we are not trapped in our own storm, we can hold ourselves and others with more kindness. When we are not identified with every passing wave, we can float instead of drown. In Western culture, identity is often seen as a virtue. Be yourself is a common slogan. But Buddhism gently questions, which self? Because the self we are being today is not the same as yesterday, and won't be the same tomorrow. When we cling too tightly to identity, we suffer. We feel pressure to live up to a certain image. We judge ourselves and others. We resist change. But when we see that identity is more like a costume than a core, we can wear it lightly. We can take it off when it no longer fits. We can meet each moment fresh, without the weight of who we think we're supposed to be. And that, in itself, is a kind of awakening. The illusion of self is not a mistake. It is part of how the mind functions. But when we start to see it as illusion, we no longer take it so seriously. We no longer let it rule our lives. We can laugh more, forgive more, love more freely. So as we close this section, I invite you once again, observe. Look not just at what you experience, but at who you think is experiencing it. See if that you is as solid as you once believed. You may find, with gentle curiosity, that it's more like a reflection in water, present, shimmering, but never fixed. And in that realization, you begin to step into the vast, open freedom that the Buddha called nibbana, the extinguishing not of life, but of illusion, the illusion of a self that was never truly there. That is not the end. It is the beginning of true peace. When we begin to see through the illusion of a permanent self, the landscape of our lives starts to shift in quiet but profound ways. It doesn't mean we lose our sense of purpose or become detached from life. Rather, it means we begin to live with more clarity and less fear. Less clinging, less resistance. Let us look at relationships. For instance, much of the suffering in our relationships comes from the belief in fixed identities, both our own and those of others. We expect others to act a certain way because that's how they are. We get disappointed or angry when they change or behave differently. We define them in rigid ways. She's selfish. He's always like that. They never understand me. But these are just snapshots of behavior frozen in time, mistaken for something permanent. Buddhism invites us to hold others with the same understanding we are learning to offer ourselves, as changing, flowing beings, not as static roles or identities. This understanding does not excuse harmful behavior or remove accountability, but it does remove the unnecessary suffering we cause by expecting permanence in an impermanent world. When we believe in a solid self, we carry grudges longer, we hold resentments tighter, and we struggle to forgive. But when we realize that what we call self is a process, one that changes moment to moment, we begin to soften. We begin to see that the person who hurt us is not exactly the same person now. Nor are we. There's space for healing. This shift in perspective also transforms the way we approach success and failure. If we are not a fixed self, then our achievements and our mistakes are not permanent stamps on our being. They are experiences that arise and pass. We can learn from them without becoming trapped in them. Imagine how liberating it is to live without the weight of constantly proving yourself. To be free from the inner voice that says you must achieve more, be more, look better, win, outshine. These voices are rooted in a belief that your value comes from comparison and permanence. But if there is no fixed self, there is also no one to compare, no static identity to defend. This doesn't mean we stop growing or caring. It means we grow naturally. Like a flower grows towards sunlight, not because it's insecure, but because it's alive. We can still have dreams, goals, and passions, but we pursue them without the anxiety of needing them to define who we are. One of the most important applications of the teaching on not-self lies in how we relate to our suffering. So often, when pain arises, physical, emotional, mental, we immediately say, "I am suffering," and this identification makes the suffering heavier. Buddhism encourages a subtle but transformative shift. Instead of, "I am suffering," we say, "There is suffering. Why does this matter?" Because by stepping back and observing suffering as a process rather than something owned, we loosen the grip. We make room for awareness to arise. And awareness is the beginning of healing. The Buddha taught that clinging is the root of suffering. We cling to pleasure, to identity, to the idea of a self, to beliefs and opinions. And when those things inevitably change or fail us, we feel pain. But what if we could meet life as it is, moment to moment, without needing it to reinforce an identity? This is the essence of mindfulness. It's not just about being present. It's about being present without clinging, without needing each moment to say something about me. When we meditate, we are practicing this directly. We sit, and we observe the breath, the body, the thoughts, the feelings. They come and go. And each time we notice a thought like, "I'm not doing this right," or "I should be more focused," we can gently see that as just another wave. Not truth, not identity, just passing weather. In this way, meditation becomes a mirror. It reflects back the fluid nature of our experience. It teaches us not to hold on too tightly. And it helps us see that beneath all the noise, there is a spaciousness, a peace, a kind of quiet knowing that does not need to be someone. That knowing is not a self. It does not say, "I am this or that." It just is. It's the background in which all experience arises. Many Buddhist teachers point to this silent awareness as the true refuge, not as a self, but as freedom from self. It is not a thing to grasp, but a space to rest in. The more we touch it, the more we trust that we don't need to hold on so tightly to identity. We don't need to fix every part of our story. We can simply be. Let us now return to the idea of impermanence, or anicca, which is deeply connected to the teaching of not-self. Everything we experience is impermanent. Our bodies, our feelings, our thoughts, our possessions, our relationships, even the earth beneath our feet and the stars above will one day pass. If we are honest, this truth can be hard to face. We want things to last. We want love to last, youth to last, happiness to last, and when they don't, we feel betrayed, even though deep down we know change is inevitable. The teaching of not-self arises from this very truth. If all things are impermanent, then there cannot be a permanent self within that changing stream. What we call me is simply a combination of impermanent elements temporarily held together. And again, this is not a cause for despair, it is the root of freedom. Because when we stop trying to make the impermanent permanent, we stop suffering. We begin to ride the waves of life instead of resisting them. We grieve, yes, we feel loss, but we do not drown in it. We find grace even in letting go. In practical terms, this means we begin to live more lightly. We speak with more kindness because we don't need to dominate. We listen more deeply because we're not waiting to insert our identity into every conversation. We forgive more quickly because we see how often we ourselves change. The illusion of self begins to fade, and in its place arises something softer, more spacious, a kind of open-hearted presence. We are no longer trying to be someone. We are simply being. And from that space, love flows more easily. Compassion arises more naturally. Wisdom deepens. So much of our suffering is built on the belief that we must become something. That we are not enough as we are. That we must chase worth through identity. But the Buddha's teaching is simple and profound. You are not a fixed self. You don't need to become. You already are. Not in the sense of a solid I, but in the sense of awareness itself, alive, present, free. And so, in letting go of self, we don't lose anything real. We lose only the tension of pretending. We lose the fear of being someone. And in that loss, we gain something beautiful, the peace of being no one in particular, yet open to everything. This is not a philosophy to memorize. It is a truth to be tasted. As the Buddha said, come and see for yourself. When we begin to understand the illusion of the self, we must also explore the deep roots of attachment and aversion, two powerful forces that keep the illusion alive. According to Buddhist teaching, these two, along with ignorance, are called the three poisons. They are the engines behind our suffering, and they all revolve around the belief in a solid I. Attachment arises when we want to possess or hold on to something, an experience, a person, an identity, or even a belief. Aversion arises when we want to push something away, pain, discomfort, uncertainty, criticism, and ignorance is the lack of wisdom that causes us not to see clearly the impermanent, unsatisfactory, and selfless nature of reality. Now, you may ask, why are attachment and aversion so tied to the self? Because they both rely on a fundamental idea that there is someone who can gain or lose something. That there is a fixed me who can be improved by gaining and harmed by losing. But when we look deeply, we start to see that all experiences come and go. The feeling of joy comes. The feeling of pain comes. Thoughts arise. Emotions arise. But none of them stay forever. They flow in. They stay for a while. And then they pass. So what, then, are we holding on to? When we cling to something in this impermanent world, we are trying to freeze the river. And when the river keeps flowing, as it always will, we suffer. The same is true for aversion. When something unpleasant arises, a difficult conversation, a painful memory, a physical ache, we often try to resist it. We push it away, deny it, cover it up, or distract ourselves. But the energy we spend in resistance often causes more suffering than the original pain. What if we could meet each moment, pleasant or unpleasant, with openness? What if we could stop seeing life through the lens of, how is this affecting me? And instead see it as just a wave passing through awareness? That is the freedom that comes from letting go of self. Let us consider how this understanding changes the way we approach our inner world. So many of us carry heavy stories. I'm not good enough. I always mess things up. I'm unlovable. These are not just thoughts. They become identities. And once we believe them, we begin to act them out. But what if we saw these stories for what they are, just patterns of thought? Shaped by past experience, conditioned by culture, but not truths? The Buddha taught that thoughts are not self. They arise and pass like clouds. Some are helpful, some are harmful, but none of them are who we are. The mind produces thoughts just like the body produces heat. It's natural. It's just what the mind does. When we meditate, we learn to observe thoughts without identifying with them. A thought arises, I'm failing, and instead of grabbing it, we can simply notice, thinking is happening, and let it pass. This does not mean we become passive or ignore real issues in our lives. It means we deal with life not from a place of fear or identity, but from clarity and presence. Think of it this way. If you walk into a room with a mirror, and the mirror is covered with dust, you can't see your reflection clearly. The dust is like our conditioned thoughts and identities. Meditation is the gentle practice of wiping the mirror clean, Not because we want to add a new identity, but because we want to see truly. And when the mirror is clean, what do we see? We see not a fixed self, but the dance of life. The breath moving in and out, the heart beating, sounds coming and going, thoughts appearing and fading. A river, not a rock. From this place of clarity, compassion arises, because when you realize you are not your thoughts, you also realize others are not theirs. You stop judging people so quickly. You stop taking things so personally. You become more curious, more kind, more humble. The illusion of self breaks down the walls between me and you. And in their place, we find connection. Now, let's reflect on how this understanding of not self supports us in dealing with fear, especially the deep fear of death. Most human fear is rooted in the fear of ending, the fear that one day, I will no longer be. But if we investigate closely, we see that what we fear is not death itself, but the loss of the self we've been protecting, building, and clinging to our whole lives. But what if that self never truly existed the way we imagined? The Buddha compared the self to a chariot. If you take apart the wheels, the frame, the seat, the axle, where is the chariot? It doesn't exist independently. It's a label we give to the collection of parts. In the same way, I is just a convenient word we use to describe the combination of body, thoughts, feelings, memories, perceptions, but no fixed, permanent I can be found in any of those. So what dies? The body dies. Thoughts stop arising. The stream of consciousness fades. But there was never a solid self to die, only a flowing process. This insight can bring tremendous peace. It doesn't remove the mystery of death, but it removes the terror of losing something that was never truly separate to begin with. You begin to live with a different quality of attention. Each moment becomes precious, not because it belongs to me, but because it is fleeting, alive, and unrepeatable. You care more deeply, not out of fear, but out of love. You become less caught in your own narrative and more present with others. You listen more. You hold hands longer. You forgive quicker, because you understand. This is all passing. And in the face of that truth, only love makes sense. This is why Buddhist practice is not about escaping life, but about entering it fully, with open eyes, with an undefended heart, with a mind that no longer needs to cling to I. So we meditate, we reflect, we practice not to become better versions of a separate self, but to dissolve the illusion that we were ever separate at all. And in that dissolution, a deeper joy arises, not the joy of accomplishment or recognition, but the joy of being aligned with truth, the joy of being spacious, aware, and free. Not self is not a denial of life. It is a way of fully embracing life without the burden of false identity. It is not emptiness as in nothingness. It is emptiness as in possibility, as in freedom. And when we begin to live from that place, everything changes, not dramatically or suddenly, but gently, like the way morning light slowly fills a room. And in that gentle light, we begin to see, not who we are, but what we truly are, not a thing, but a space in which all things arise and pass. To deeply understand not self, or anatta, is not just an intellectual exercise, it is a lived transformation. And one of the clearest signs that this transformation is beginning to take root is how we relate to change. The illusion of a fixed self creates constant conflict with the reality of change. We try to hold on to things, roles, emotions, beliefs, relationships, because we think they define who we are. And when they change, or when they are taken away, we feel as if part of ourselves is dying. But the truth is, we are not losing anything real. We are simply being invited to return to what has always been true, that we are not the story we tell ourselves. Think about how often we say things like, I am a teacher, I am a parent, I am successful. I am a failure. These are roles, experiences, moments, but none of them are permanent. And when we cling to them, we suffer. Suppose someone loses their job. If they believe, my worth is my career, then they don't just lose employment, they lose their identity. But if they understand that the self is not fixed, they will feel the loss. Yes, but they will not be shattered by it. They will know that this experience, too, is part of the river. It flows in, it flows out. Or think of the body. As it ages, we often struggle. Wrinkles appear, joints ache, energy fades. If we believe that, I am my body, then aging feels like a personal betrayal. But if we see the body as part of the ever-changing nature of phenomena, we can meet aging with grace. This does not mean we don't care about health or relationships or meaning. It means we stop needing them to confirm our existence. We stop fighting change. We start flowing with it. Because in truth, we are not static beings moving through time. We are time itself unfolding. And when we let go of the self, we can finally rest in the stream instead of trying to swim upstream against the current of life. Let's look more closely now at the connection between not self and compassion. At first, it might seem strange. If there is no self, then who is there to love? Who is there to care? But here lies one of the most beautiful and liberating aspects of the Buddhist path. When we let go of the illusion of self, our heart opens, not to fewer people, but to all beings. Because when we no longer define ourselves so rigidly, we stop seeing others as other. We start to recognize that everyone is caught in the same delusion, the same cycle of clinging and suffering. And from that recognition, compassion arises naturally, not as a duty, but as an understanding. If someone insults you and you deeply believe in yourself, you may react with anger, defensiveness, or hurt. But if you see clearly that there is no solid self to defend, then there is space to see the pain in the other person. Maybe they are reacting from fear, or from their own sense of inadequacy. Maybe they are trying to affirm their identity by attacking yours. And suddenly, instead of reacting with hostility, you respond with empathy. This is not weakness. This is the power of wisdom. Think of the Dalai Lama, who speaks so often of kindness and compassion. Even in the face of loss, exile, and injustice, his strength comes not from ego, but from clarity. He knows that all beings want to be happy, and all beings suffer when they are trapped in illusion. When you drop the idea of me, what remains is not a void, it is love. A love that is not possessive. A love that does not demand anything in return. A love that sees itself in all beings. This love does not arise from self-interest. It arises from interconnectedness. The Buddha said, just as a mother protects her child, her only child, with her life, so should one cultivate a boundless heart toward all beings. Such boundlessness is only possible when the borders of the self begin to dissolve. We might wonder now, if there is no self, how do we live? How do we make choices? Set goals? Take responsibility? This is where the subtlety of the teaching must be respected. Buddhism does not say that there is no person at all. It says that what we call self is not fixed, permanent, or separate. There is still a process of mind and body. There is still decision, memory, perception, but none of it is unchanging. None of it stands alone. So we continue to live. We care for our families. We do our work. We contribute to the world. But we do so without the heavy burden of ego. We take responsibility not because we are a fixed identity, but because actions have consequences. And we are part of a web of cause and effect. This is why karma matters. Karma is not fate or punishment. It is the simple law that actions shape outcomes. And when there is no fixed self, we see that we can change. We can grow. We can choose wisdom over delusion, kindness over cruelty, peace over fear. Not self does not make us passive. It makes us free. Free to act from clarity, not from compulsion. Free to respond rather than react. Free to live with integrity. Because we are no longer trying to protect a false image. In fact, letting go of self is the beginning of authentic action. When we are not trying to be someone, we can simply do what needs to be done. When we are not obsessed with how we appear, we can truly listen. When we are not clinging to being right, we can be open to truth. The path of Buddhism is not about disappearance. It is about presence. A presence unburdened by identity. A presence that meets each moment fully, gently, and with care. And as this presence deepens, something unexpected happens. We stop looking for happiness in external things. We stop needing approval, achievement, or control to feel okay. We begin to taste a different kind of joy, one that does not depend on anything. It is the joy of enough, the joy of silence, the joy of seeing things clearly and knowing that, even without a self to defend or prove, life is beautiful as it is. So we sit, we breathe, we bow to the moment, and we begin again. There comes a point on the spiritual path when the teachings are no longer just words or ideas. They become personal. They touch something deep inside us. The illusion of self is not merely a philosophical concept. It becomes the veil we slowly start to see through in our daily life. This shift often begins subtly. You notice, for example, that you're no longer as quick to defend your opinions. Someone disagrees with you, and instead of feeling threatened or insulted, you're curious. You listen. You may even thank them. Why? Because you're no longer so tightly identified with your ideas. That is a sign of insight. The self is loosening. Or maybe you lose something, a possession, a title, a relationship, and while there is still pain, there is also space. A quiet knowing arises. This too is passing. You're not as shaken as you once were. Because your sense of identity is no longer built entirely on what you own or how you're seen. The more we see clearly, the less we need to hold on. And the more we let go, the more peace we find. This is not resignation, it is liberation. It's the discovery that we can be deeply alive without constantly fighting life. And here's the paradox. When we let go of the need to be someone, we become more fully ourselves, not as an identity, but as presence, not as a role, but as awareness. We speak more honestly, we move more freely, we suffer less, and we love more. All this begins with awareness, with mindfulness. Mindfulness, or sati in Pali, is not a trendy technique. It is the very foundation of awakening. When we are mindful, we see what is happening, inside and out, without judgment, without resistance, without grasping. We notice a thought arise, I'm not enough. And instead of believing it, we simply note it. A thought. We see anger arise, and instead of being swept away, we acknowledge, anger is present. We see the craving, the fear, the joy, the sorrow, all of it. But now we see it as passing weather, not as identity. This is the heart of Buddhist practice, not to stop thoughts or to control emotions, but to recognize their impermanence and not confuse them with who we are. When we become truly mindful, we begin to observe another important truth. The idea of I is often just a narrative that arises after the fact. Something happens, an impulse, a decision, an action, and then the mind constructs a story. I did that. But who is this I? When we look, we don't find a single, stable thing. We find moments of consciousness, flowing one into the next. We find sensations, intentions, memories, but no controller behind it all. This may sound unsettling at first. If there's no one in control, then who's living this life? But as the Buddha taught, there is agency, there is the capacity for wisdom, compassion, choice, but it arises dependently. It arises through causes and conditions, not from a fixed self, but from an interwoven field of life. So instead of saying, I decide, we can begin to see decisions as emerging from awareness. Conditioned by intention, supported by practice, the self becomes less of a noun, more of a verb, and this leads us to a new kind of freedom. Not the freedom of doing whatever we want, but the freedom of no longer being bound by what we think we are. Imagine the space that opens when you're not trying to be someone all the time. When you're not trying to impress, defend, explain, or justify yourself. When you're simply living, breathing, meeting life as it comes. In this space, kindness flows more easily. So does forgiveness. So does humor. Why? Because you're not protecting a fragile ego. You're not guarding a false self. You are simply here. This is why the illusion of self is not a depressing idea. It's a joyful one. It lifts the burden. It opens the heart. It frees the mind. You realize you don't need to become anything. You already are the space in which all things come and go. And from that space, we can engage with life not from fear, but from love, not from scarcity, but from wholeness. Now, let's take this understanding into one of the most challenging areas, relationships. Human connection is one of the most beautiful and difficult parts of life. When we believe in a fixed self, relationships often become arenas of negotiation, control, validation. We want others to make us feel secure, important, seen. We expect them to confirm our identity, to reflect back the self we want to believe in. But relationships built on ego are fragile. When the other person fails to meet our needs, or challenges our identity, we feel hurt, we withdraw, we lash out, or we shut down. But if we approach relationships from the understanding of not self, everything changes. We no longer see the other as mine. We stop needing to possess or control. We start to see them as another unfolding process, just like us. Full of joys and fears. Changing from moment to moment. Not a fixed role, but a living being. And in that seeing, love becomes more spacious, less about clinging, more about presence. We become better listeners, because we're not trying to defend our views. We become more forgiving, because we know that mistakes don't define a person. We become more grateful, because we stop taking people for granted. And when separation happens, whether through conflict or loss, we feel the pain. But we don't collapse, because we weren't using the relationship to hold up our identity. This doesn't mean we stop caring. On the contrary, we care more deeply. But now, our love is rooted in truth, not illusion. And perhaps this is the greatest gift of all. The more we let go of the idea of I, the more we become capable of love that is unconditional. A love not based on who someone is to us, but simply on the fact that they are. That is the path of the Buddha, not the path of becoming someone perfect, but the path of unburdening, of letting go, of waking up to what has always been true, that we are not the thing we've been holding so tightly. We are awareness, we are presence, we are life itself, flowing, changing, interconnected, and free. So let us walk gently. Let us see clearly. Let us love without needing a reason. And in doing so, may we discover that we were never a separate self to begin with, but something far more vast, quiet, and luminous than we ever imagined. As we come to the final part of this exploration, let us take a deep breath together. Let us return to the simplicity of being here, right now. Let us rest, not in more information, but in presence. Throughout this journey, we've spoken of the illusion of the self, not as an abstract theory, but as something each of us can begin to notice in our own experience. The Buddha was not interested in metaphysical speculation. He cared about suffering, and the end of suffering, and the illusion of the self, he taught, is at the very heart of our pain. Why? Because when we believe there is a permanent, solid me inside this body and mind, we cling, we fight, we grasp, we fear, we try to protect and preserve this me at all costs. And the world becomes a battlefield, us versus them. Gain versus loss. Success versus failure. But the more we investigate, the more we see, this, me, is not what we thought. It is not a thing, it is a process. Not an essence, but a flow. When we sit quietly and observe, we find thoughts arise, emotions move, sensations shift, but no fixed owner can be found. This is not just a truth to be believed, it is a truth to be seen. And once seen, it liberates. For when there is no fixed self, there is no fixed suffering. Everything moves, everything changes. Even our deepest wounds are not permanent. Even our most painful identities are not who we truly are. And this is where the teachings of the Buddha become profoundly hopeful. Because if the self is not fixed, then we are not trapped. If our suffering is not inherent, then freedom is possible, not in some distant future, but here, now, in this very moment. This freedom is not dramatic. It is subtle. It arises not through great accomplishments, but through simple seeing, through gentle awareness, through compassion for this ever-changing stream of life we call me. Let's pause here and reflect. What happens when you look at yourself, not with judgment, but with curiosity? What happens when you observe your thoughts as passing clouds, rather than truths to defend? What happens when you feel your emotions as energy, rather than labels? The Buddha invited us to investigate, not to become detached or cold, but to awaken a deeper warmth, a kindness born of clarity. When we see that others too are not fixed selves, something beautiful happens. We stop expecting them to be perfect. We stop holding them to identities they no longer inhabit. We forgive more easily. We listen more deeply. We recognize that just like us, they are moving through life, trying, failing, learning, evolving. This insight changes everything. It shifts the way we work, love, speak, and rest. We are no longer caught in roles. We become more fluid, more real, more alive. And yes, there will still be pain. Bodies will grow old. Relationships will change. Dreams will rise and fall. But now we hold them differently. Lightly, gently, like a flower in the palm of our hand, not to crush or possess, but to appreciate, moment by moment. This is the fruit of Buddhist practice. Not escape, not spiritual superiority, but a humble, open-hearted way of being in the world. We still show up, we still care, we still take action, but now, we do so without the heavy burden of self. We act not out of fear or ego, but out of love and wisdom. And this makes all the difference. So, how do we live this truth? The path is simple, but not easy. It begins with mindfulness. Sit, breathe, notice, return, again and again. You do not need to be perfect. You only need to be present. And when the mind says, I can't do this, notice that too. That, too, is just a thought, not who you are. You can also reflect daily on the three characteristics the Buddha taught: impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not self. Let them sink into your bones, not to create fear, but to awaken wisdom. Look around you. Everything is changing. Every sound, every face, every breath. Nothing lasts. And that's okay. In fact, it's beautiful. Because impermanence is what makes life precious. Look within. See that chasing pleasure and avoiding pain never brings lasting peace. See that clinging to identity never brings true security. And see, too, that the you who clings is itself just another pattern. Another momentary appearance in awareness. Then let go, not as an effort, but as a softening, a willingness to release, a falling into trust. And from there, live simply, live honestly, live kindly. Help others not because it builds your image, but because they, too, are not separate. Love not because it makes you special, but because love is what remains when the self dissolves. And when fear arises, when doubt comes, When grief returns, as they will, meet them not as enemies, but as guests. Bow to them, learn from them, and let them pass. This is the practice. This is the way, not a destination, but a path walked with humility and care. In the end, the illusion of self is not something we destroy. It's something we outgrow. Like a child letting go of imaginary friends. We thank it for the protection it offered, and step into something larger. That something larger is life itself. Not owned, not controlled, not divided, just life, vast, mysterious, intimate, and free. May this teaching nourish you. May it soften your heart. May it awaken the quiet joy that comes from not needing to be anyone, just fully. Beautifully here, and in this stillness, may you remember what the Buddha realized beneath the Bodhi tree. There is no self to defend, no self to fear, no self to perfect. There is only the way things are. And in knowing that deeply, you are free.